Today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, Lisa Whittle is in the house. She is so beloved by so many of you, and I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with her. Lisa, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks, Julie. I feel like I've been looking forward to this for a long time. We do have lots of mutual friends, and your reputation precedes you. We'll say that.
Oh, no. That can mean so many things.
But in this case, it's good.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Lisa, I'm sure so many of my listeners are familiar with you and your work and your passion and the things that you do within the faith community. But in case we have somebody who has not heard of Lisa Whittle, would you fill them in on who you are, where you live, kids, dogs, cats, all the things?
Well, I feel like dogs should go first because she's my most faithful companion, possibly. She's sitting at my feet right now and always sort of doing that with my dog, Maggie. I think she's about 12, so we'll just start there. But I do also have been married for almost 25 years. That's quite an accomplishment for me, I would say. I think for anybody, but I'm such an independent that it was always a question mark. Lord, can I even do marriage? And can I do it for 25 years? Goodness, I'm just grateful to God for that. And then we have 3 kids. And that's another big question mark was, can I even be a mother? Can I survive motherhood? Like all the questions along the way, I feel like I've kind of weathered and asked a lot. Right now, the answer is yes, I'm still mothering 22-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 17-year-old. So we've been through some motherhood things. And we live on the East Coast. We live in North Carolina. And boy, God's been good. Written some books and Bible teacher and love the Word of God. And I'm a pastor's daughter. So there's just been a lot of stuff in life, as with everyone.
I love that self-disclosure about, Lord, am I really even built for marriage? I think there is such an assumption a lot of times in our communities, particularly in our faith communities, that somehow we're all just sort of built for the marriage thing. But I do think we have such a burgeoning generation of women who, you know what, we're embracing the idea that we can provide for ourselves and we can do certain things and we can move forward. And so what are you seeing in that space? Because I just love the self-disclosure of that, the analysis of going, am I somebody who can really be connected for that long? Like, how would that really work? So what are you seeing amongst the women of our peer group and then those who are younger coming after us when it comes to this idea of really having the awareness to ask that important of a question? Am I really built for it?
Well, I think there's just a lot of freedom and joy in being able to admit non-perfection. There's a lot of freedom in that. I think in it not being all about us. And, one of the things that I have said first to my husband, because I think the conversation for me, I don't want to talk about things publicly about marriage that I haven't already addressed in my house, right? It feels like a lack of sincerity, and I can't roll with that. That's one thing I can't do. So one of the things that I've said to my husband, and I just really believe it's true, is your best bet. I've been faithful to my husband for 25 years, and I don't say that with pride. I say that with a lot of like, wow, God is good. And I'm even shocked to some degree because I know myself, I know my flesh, I know my tendencies. And I've said to my husband, your greatest bet for me staying faithful to you is for me staying faithful to God. And when you need to start worrying is when I go sideways in my relationship with God, right? So like that's a sign that things could get really dicey around here in our marriage. So I think it's an interesting thing, Julie, because I know you have your finger on the pulse of women, and I do as well. I make it my mission to do that. And what I see is like this sort of battle cry for it to be all about us. There's nobody that loves strong women more than me. Good grief. I've been strong since the minute I came out of the womb. But what I found is the freedom in realizing it's not all about me. And that's what I think our generation needs to know. But the next generation coming around too is the greatest amount of freedom we'll ever have is deferring to the great one who is Jesus and letting him manage our life. Because if he can manage our marriages, which he can, and if we'll allow him to do that and our relationships and ourselves, then we've got a chance at being a good wife. We got a chance at being a good mom. He's the only chance I've got. And that's just the truth.
I love that you break that down that way because now, believe me, I love learning. I love taking the classes. I love gathering the information. But there comes a point in our parenting, our marriage journeys, our journeys just with ourselves that yes, there's some great wisdom out there. There's some godly wisdom out there. But until we're really leaning completely into our faith, there is not really advice in the world that's going to get past the mess that sometimes I bring to the table when it comes to these different relationships and different expectations.
Right.
Lisa, I think one thing that I've done, I see it being done, I know it's something that you address and have a real passion for, is how we sometimes really make it complicated. We talk about, okay, really lean into God, and that's where you need to leave your marriage, that He can deal with it. But sometimes we just really seem to create a lot of steps and a lot of work around that. And if we miss the quiet time in the morning and if it's not quite this long, and if we misplaced our highlighters, and then if we couldn't find our Jesus calling book, and we start the day thinking we've already failed. How do we get to the place where we're really pursuing Christ and sure, using some of these practices around pursuing Him, but not get really caught up in some of it?
I'll tell you from my own life what I've begun to notice about myself. And I'm not young, so this is not like I've just started living yesterday. I think what I've noticed, Julie, about my own self that could possibly be helpful to someone else is I've noticed how much I make about me. And even in my good quest to do things, I've made it about me. And it's quite exhausting because then there's just a ton of performance that comes into that. And listen, when you're born into the church, you're just sort of like that. Performance is not a hard sell. It's just really not. So what's interesting about it is the Lord, even in writing Jesus Over Everything, the Lord began to show me how I had this long history with making relational conversations about me and my spiritual life about me. And it's gross. It's hard to look at. But it's really important because it's freeing and it changes things. And it's no wonder that we spend a lot of our time just, really, really on this hamster wheel spiritually and relationally on a hamster wheel. Because when you make it about yourself, then there's some way that you can get yourself out of it. And, even now, as I think about in chapter 1 of Jesus Over Everything, I talk about deadly overs and I talk about things like over apologizing, over analyzing, things like that. It's interesting to me after I wrote that. I mean, I have lived 48 years and I have just begun to realize, and that thing that I wrote there has held me accountable in the months since, not to over apologize and not to over explain things. And I've realized that in the process of doing that, how many relationships I have royally messed up. So I really think it's the first step in even just getting ourselves out of this perfectionistic system that we've been in is to become aware that we have even done it, become aware that we have become very self-centered in our conversations. And it's really important.
How do we balance well? Because I've known people that I feel like their lives, at least from me on the outside looking in, look like those lives have been completely predicated on serving others, serving God. And I've seen some of those folks come to a point of complete flat burnout. I mean, we're talking just done, done, and done. Both of us being in the space where we serve women, you and I are both seeing the phenomenon of what psychologists are calling the walk-away wife. The woman who just out of the blue seems to throw her hands up, walks out on the husband, the kids, and doesn't look back. And some of the report from that coming back in is there was no space for me. There was no boundary for me. So I love the message of making sure we're being so intentional to get rid of a lot of self-agenda, a lot of self-performance, a lot of all of those things. But how do we balance it so that we don't end up in the ditch on the other side, which can look a whole lot like codependency and other issues that come from not taking a pulse on where we are?
Yeah. First of all, I want to acknowledge that it's real, that there have been a whole lot of us that have not made room for our gifting, our dreams, the things that God has breathed inside of us. I mean, Julie, I am so passionate about us doing those things. I mean, I feel like that what we don't understand is that God is not asking us to sit in a room and make everything about other people and never do anything that feeds our soul. Listen, God created us individually with gifts, and he passionately wants us to use those gifts for the glory of God. It makes no sense that women would not be out being and thereby doing. And I mean, don't get me started. I can preach a whole thing on this. Obviously, I podcast. I have ministries that I've started, and the whole list. Here's what I want to say. What's interesting is we just misunderstand it, and we complicate it for ourselves. So my charge, my encouragement, my everything with this is saying you're going to find the greatest measure of freedom to be who you are and to do these things by not taking it into your own hands and figuring it out for yourself. So for the example of, like, say you have a weird relational moment, you have people that are wanting you to do more and be more. Because listen, let's be honest. I love the church. It's my greatest passion, but I also speak bluntly to it because I love us so much. And I feel like I've earned the clout by being in it my whole life in various positions. The church will ask folks to do whatever, they are willing to do. Let's be honest with it, because we need folks.
Right.
But here's the thing. When we begin to not have the ability to stand and say, this is not the greatest use of my time, gifts, and talents. And we misunderstand that we think, okay, well, I need to over apologize and over explain why I can't do this certain commitment. Then we get into this weird thing of taking on too much, right? And thereby we exhaust ourselves. So my charge is this. Understand why you feel the need to over-explain and over-apologize is actually not godly at all. It's actually self-serving on some level because it's your desire to please folks. We all have to struggle with this desire, but it's not the one that I want to ask you to have. I want to tell you that there's a better way. And really, so that's the whole thing. And by the way, in the book, I also talk about the feeling the need to cover for other folks and things like that. Those are things, Julie, that exhaust us as women that I want us to no longer do. And when we put Jesus first, it is my firmest belief that we don't do that stuff anymore. Pro-women, it's a pro-women message, but it's ultimately a pro-Jesus message because Jesus is for women.
Right. I love that distinction because I have been so guilty and am still wrestling with the sense of the need to take care of it for others. If they're not going to get it done, then I have I feel some kind of mandate, and I would call it a Jesus mandate, except that I'm totally with you. I'm finally learning that I don't think that's actually what he was asking me to do. The irony to me is that sometimes in trying to be very selfless, when it doesn't incorporate the right understanding of who God has created each of us individually to be, we accidentally can slide into a very strange place of self-serving when it comes to protecting our own reputation. Does that seem to collate with exactly where you're headed?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I come into this with a lot of understanding because, like I said, my whole life, I feel like I've over-explained myself, And I tell you, it kind of took a podcast in some ways to get me to see how much I over-explain myself when I would ask guests a question and I would spend so much time kind of couching the question or whatever. Because when you have a bold personality like me, Julie, you spend most of your life, especially because I grew up in the 70s and 80s when a female with a bold personality wasn't really that great, right? So I've spent a lot of my life apologizing for myself. And so I come at this with a great bit of love and understanding for what this is. It's like, we don't mean to do it. We really don't. But I want to show us a better way. And that's where I come from. Listen, here's the reality of covering for someone else, for trying to compensate for someone else in particular as it relates to that piece of it. There are times that God needs us to get out of the way and let it lay bare before him and let it be what it is. And we're in the way of that. There's just a lot of folks that God needs to do a work in, including us, including let it start with me. In our efforts to be so noble and in our efforts to be kind or whatever, or let me do this, we get into that. Now, there's a whole chapter on service over spotlight. We talk about service. So please don't misunderstand this. I think we have the capacity as believers to be wise enough to discern this subject and that subject and that subject if we're willing to not be lazy. Because what I find is that sometimes we just throw everything in the pot and we say, well, I can't serve. Are you saying I can't serve? Come on now. We've been schooled in the word. Let's take responsibility and let's learn these things and let's do them. It's time.
How do we distinguish? And I think I'm still learning this, and I'm a little bit older than you are, and I really thought by this point I'd be more of a grown-up. I really did, Lisa. I thought there was some land out there that, like we would be the grown-ups, and I still turn around twice and I'm like, how are we the grown-ups? I don't quite understand how we got there.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, but here we are. How can I do a self-check to know if I'm sliding into places? What does it feel like to be over apologizing? What does it feel like to be over explaining? Because I think some of us, depending on where we are in our faith walks or the faith communities that we are part of, let's face it, there's some faith communities out there who, if you're not, volunteer number one to everything, will tell you that you're not serving God. So how do we know when we're sliding into some places that can be toxic in that way?
Okay, I'm going to give you an answer that's going to be really clear, and then I'm going to give you an answer that's going to frustrate somebody. Your answer first, so that will please some people, which is I've got a quiz for you to take to find out what deadly over you struggle with. So that's going to please some folks that say, let me know what I am. I'm sure you'll have it in your show notes, but it's lisawhittle.com/Joe. Joe, by the way, stands for Jesus over everything, but we shorten everything to Joe. And so that they can take and find out, okay, what deadly over do I struggle with? It's like a 20-question quiz, whatever. So they can kind of identify that. We also have a guide that can take them through a process of changing that behavior, because I find that really important, replacing that behavior with something else. Okay, that's the one answer. The frustrating answer is this, but I think it'll resonate with some folks. We know, Julie, deep down what we struggle with. We just know. We innately know. We know if we over apologize. We know if we over explain. Here's how we know. It just feels gross. It just doesn't feel good. So we get into a relationally awkward moment, let's say. And do I need to define a relationally awkward moment? We know what that is, right? So we get into a relationally awkward moment with someone, and basically we begin to then over explain a situation, and then it starts snowballing, and we start getting into just a weirder dialogue, and it starts getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And before we know it, we've actually damaged the whole situation more, maybe almost beyond repair. And in that moment, if we would just say, no, I can't do this. I'm so sorry. Or, that's really not my personality. It just kind of is what it is. And we do that in a way that's loving, that's kind, but firm. It's amazing what is okay that we don't think is going to be okay. And it's taken me a long time to learn this. Listen, I didn't know this when I was 25, but I think we've got some sharp 25-year-olds out there that are listening, that if I can tell them this, I think they can do a better job than I did. So that's the hope anyway.
One thing I found in myself, and I'd love to hear if this resonates with you, is part of the reason I sometimes over apologize and over explain is because when I'm in the reverse situation, when I'm asking someone to do something, I really don't want to hear no, and I don't want to hear anything other than, sure, I'll sign on to your agenda. And so part of what I find is I'm trying to mitigate what I think is going to be the other person's response, because my flesh struggles with what my response is when I'm the one making the request, and I'm desperate to get one more person to sign up to do whatever the thing is. And I really don't want an excuse. I just need somebody to come alongside and help. Do you find sometimes that we can be at risk of that in a way that is actually reflective of what our own responses are when we're on the other side of that line?
Yeah, I think that's very astute. I think that is, or at least in part, it. I think we do think, well, this is how I would feel if someone just said, no, I can't do that. I'm so sorry. So for that piece of it, I actually do address that in the book. And I say, hey, let's be more gracious with people's no's. Let's allow people to say no and not ask them to explain it. And so I think that is important for us in the body of Christ moving forward. I think we need to be more gracious with people's no's and let them say no and not expect. I think on the flip side of that, though, I think there is a lot of assumption on our part that people will require that of us. I think there's a little bit of that, Julie, and I don't know where you grew up, but I think there's also, especially in the South, I think there is a regional expectation more so. And I feel that. I live in North Carolina. I was born in Texas. I grew up a lot in some southern states as my father was a pastor. So I get that. There is a feeling they're going to expect me to say more. It was interesting, though. 2 weeks ago, I had 2 incidents where I started to over-explain myself in an email. And I'm telling you, this chapter 1 haunted me. I was like, I can't believe that my own words are coming back to me. I literally started to type out an email and say, I'm so sorry, I can't do this, or I'm late on this. And I felt like it was important to apologize, because remember, there's a distinction what I'm saying here about, I'm not saying don't apologize. I'm saying over apologizing, which is completely different. There are some apologies we need to make. In fact, I submit we need to make more apologies about things that that are really actually important. We need to save the apologies for what are important. Over apologizing is different, and it's self-serving, so it has a different motive. But I said, I'm so sorry, I'm behind on this or whatever. And then I typed a qualifying statement that came after. And I had to really go back and delete that statement because it just wasn't necessary. And I had to let it lie. And that's what the Lord continued to say to me as I have been convicted by this for myself. Lisa, let it lie. Let this lie. If it does not need more explanation, let it lie. Or if your explanation is in order to make yourself look better or feel better, let it lie. And really, at the end of the day, Julie, only the Holy Spirit is going to be able to guide us in what needs to be explained and what doesn't, what needs to be apologized over and what doesn't. I'm no one's Holy Spirit. I'm just saying, let's take a look at this and become more aware of what has become very self-serving and thus very complicating in our lives.
Right. Very much complicating our relationship with how we see God. In 2018, I was writing down some things that I felt like I was supposed to focus on for the year and things I was needing to learn. And at some point, I felt that God had me write down, God is not the job. And I think there are people in ministry or people who serve a lot that statement, they're like, oh yeah, I get that. There are people who are like, I don't have any clue what you're saying. But for myself, what that moment meant, and when I looked at those words, it was that realization of just how much performance, how much reputation protecting or building, how much platform development, all the things can really get in the way of simply being before God. Exactly to your message, Jesus over everything.
I got parked in my home, by the way.
Yeah.
Good. That's really good. I get it totally.
I keep writing it in different, fonts, and we have to have an adult coloring book of God is not the job. And then I'll feel like, I have I colored today? Have I done the thing? I'll be right back in that loop. But now I want to take a really hard left. I'm talking a hard left. We have been like so beautifully spiritual with tangible application. Absolutely. But you ran a little experiment in your development around this message for this book that is different. And that message is, and that experience was that you did not shop for a year. I'm going to need you to unpack this for me, because what if I'm gifted? What if I have the gift of TJ Maxx and Marshalls? What if I express my creativity in those places? Talk to me about this year sabbatical from shopping.
Well, you just described me. I have the gift. I express my creativity through shopping. That is exactly why I had to take this fast. I do. I opened the book talking about it. And the reason why is because I felt it really important to let folks know how often I try to put me over Jesus. And that might sound so crazy, like, well, what does that have to do with shopping? Well, for me, it had to do a lot because anytime I began to feel something, right? Something that I didn't want to deal with, including sometimes I didn't want to deal with him or what he was asking me to do or how he was drawing me in or convicting me of something. I just kind of turned to shopping because it was an easy thing for me. And the interesting thing about it, Julie, is I never went into debt with it. So it wasn't like there was a tangible credit card that had this huge, and growing debt on it that someone could look to say, oh, wow, you're out of control. It was a very subtle, sly thing that was happening that really didn't put anyone out. So that's trickier. That's far trickier. I still buy things on a bargain. I like my sort of game has always been buy things that are inexpensive and have people ooh and ah at how amazing they are and how amazing they look, and then shock them with the fact that I just paid $5 for it. Like, it's sort of a game. Okay, so
Oh, no, I'm way into this game.
Okay, you're way.
Ask me how much this blouse was. Just ask me.
How much was the blouse?
$6. So, like, I'm so with you right now. I feel so connected to you.
Yes. Okay. So, but what had happened is I had just begun to feel, and it was over time. Listen, it was not an overnight, wow, I'm just hit over this, I obey tomorrow. Are you kidding me? I mean, I have said this multiple times. I may not be God's hardest case, but I'm definitely in the top 10. Probably the top 5. So it took a while, and it was a series of things where the Lord just began to show me, Lisa, your go-to is not me. Your go-to is shopping. You go there when you want comfort. You go there when you want relief. You go there when you get in a fight with your husband. You go there when you feel chubby. You go there, the list could go on. And, it really was an experiment for me in a way. It became this. I don't feel as connected to the Lord as I want to be, because if there's one thing I desire, it's to have a really deep relationship with the Lord. And I think there's a lot of folks listening that can relate to that. But sometimes I don't feel that. Sometimes I don't feel as close to the Lord as I want. And so my whole experiment was, could it be shopping that's coming between us? That seems so far-fetched, and it kind of seems dumb. But wouldn't it be stupid if it were clothes that were coming between us? Wouldn't it be dumb if it were my shopping habits? Because for me, the two areas that I really struggled with were clothes, and that could be clothes, shoes, hats. Handbags aren't a big deal for me, but like, I like some hats, I like some shoes, I like clothes. And then the other area is decor for my home, because I always wanted to be an interior decorator. So for me, I love home decor and those kinds of things. And so for me, those were the two areas that I struggle with. And so I thought, am I at the point where I'm willing to set aside anything and see if that is what is coming between me and God? And I got to that point where I thought, I have to be willing. It didn't start out as a year. It started out as about a month experiment. I thought, I can do this for a month. Yeah, we'll just do this for a month. And after a month, the Lord said, you're not done. And we kept going, and it ended up being a year. And of course, I write more in depth in the book, but it was an interesting ride, and I learned a lot in the process.
I think there are a lot of things that can sneak in on us because they're not sin per se. There's not some moral thing going on. But in my world, it can be things like, oh, I'm a huge reader and I love to read. And I don't think there's anything wrong with reading fiction and nonfiction and all the things, but I can escape into a book, and that's not always bad. But when I'm escaping into a book because I don't want to deal with some stuff, well, there we go. I think for some people, it can be exercise. For some people, it can be different types of food. For some people, it can be travel. For some people, it can be naps. We all have something that it doesn't fall in a category of moral sin or moral decline, but it still can be an idol. And I love that you bring this up in a way to say, it wasn't that we were way in debt. It wasn't this. It wasn't that. It was just the thing that gave me more comfort at times than turning to God. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I think about the listeners right now. I think about the listener. And I think if I was sitting with them and I would look at them and I would say, I don't want you to hear judgment in this. What I want you to hear is this. You have to decide for yourself what you want. You really do. You have to decide, do I want the most vibrant relationship with God that I can have? And I can't decide that for you. And you can't decide that for someone else. It's like, this is so personal, Julie. And that's when you say, this thing over here that I actually love, that isn't a sin, that I can do. Like, God is not going to breathe down my neck and beat me over the head and say, don't do this anymore. He's just not. But do I love it so much that I'm willing to let it tarnish or compromise moments I could have with God, take away from that? And, that's something that I still wrestle with. I mean, right now I'm actually on another shopping fast. I'm doing a 6-week shopping fast because when I did the shopping fast years ago, it was more about not going into stores because online shopping wasn't as much of a thing. Certainly there was online, but it just wasn't. I wasn't on Instagram to the degree I am and now get all of the advertisements that pop up on my phone. Now it's more, the struggle is not to hit add to cart. That's the real struggle for me.
Right.
Because I love to online shop. So I still have to ask myself these questions all the time. Like, do I love this more than I love God? What am I trying to fill right now? And listen, over the pandemic where we've been kind of in our homes isolating, I've binged some shows. I've read away for some moments where I could have opened my Bible. I don't come into this as some kind of holy expert. I just say at the end of the day, you can have what you want with the Lord. And most of us really want it. We just have to want it enough.
I think those places of recognizing that, there's ambient noise that we can get accustomed to. There's white noise that when we feel like we're not hearing from God, sure, we may have had some great victory through the Holy Spirit to, quelch and quench some things that were big noises, big sins in our lives that were really blocking us from that feeling of connection and devotion to God. But the white noise is the thing that often we forget to check. And so I love that you bring this up to the top, that it can be some things that, it's not wrong. It's not wrong that you've got a gift to TJ Maxx because, girl, I see you and I am with you in that gifting. But just where are we positioning it in importance in our lives? Lisa, I just love that we've gotten to have this conversation. Lisa, again, thank you so much for being with me. I just think that you have sown such wisdom and so many great things for people to think about and allow to tumble over in their hearts and spirits and minds. So thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you, Julie.
Be sure and check out the show notes that our content coordinator, Rebecca, puts together each and every week. A big shout out to Donna. She is our producer and helps make sure that the audio quality and all the things are the way they need to be so that you can get the episodes. I would love to ask you a big favor. Would you do this for me? Would you go and subscribe and like the podcast wherever you get your podcasts? It really does help get the word out. And if you leave us a 5-star rating and a really sweet review, you might just get to hear your review read online here on the podcast. I would love to connect with you on all places social. You can find me, Julie Lyles Carr. I particularly love Instagram, so come see me over there. And while you're on the webs, be sure and check out AllMomDoes.com, which is our blog and website. It's an incredible resource for you. And of course, All Mom Does on the socials. And we also have the All Mom Does podcast discussion group where I check in and chat with you throughout the week about the episodes. So would love to see you there as well. I'll see you next time right here on the All Mom Does podcast.